I think it's important to know that we are here and accepting that it is okay to share our stories. It was just a really helpful thing for me early on. It made me feel like my voice mattered and that I could change the world.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. Each week, I chat with artists who use print-based media to do something beyond the expected. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting episodes in English with me, as well as Spanish with Ronaldo Gil Zambrano. Together, we speak to printmakers around the globe about their practice and passions in the world of printmaking. Hello Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, currently offering possibly the best thing to happen to relief printmaking, their Woodzilla presses. Beautifully made in the Netherlands, these uniquely engineered presses perfectly combine superior craftsmanship and performance at a price that makes them accessible, whether you're a seasoned printmaking pro or new to the craft. Available across 5 sizes, each Woodzilla press is precisely manufactured from heavy-duty steel and designed to apply uniform pressure without undue work or stress for the artist, while still guaranteeing that perfectly printed result at every reveal. Check out these beauties through the link in the show notes. This episode of Hello Print Friend is also brought to you by McLean's Printing Supplies, who've been dedicated to the art and artists of relief printmaking since 1979. The small specialist team in the Pacific Northwest is the leading supplier of Japanese relief tools for printmakers in the U.S. and abroad, whose primary purpose is to help you find the materials and support you need to reach your printmaking goals. Our editor, Timothy Pauschak's 2 favorite tools are his Fatatsuwari Sankakuto 3mm V-gouge and his Josuai Maruto 1mm U-gouge, both from McLean's. But you don't have to take our word for it because these tools speak for themselves. So head on over to McLean's at imcleans.com to find your new favorite tool and keep on carving. My guest this week is Juana Estrada Hernandez. She joined me with her partner Chantel in my little house here in Santa Fe in the middle of a monsoon. In our conversation, we talk about her practice exploring the immigrant experience and border politics, her newly minted MFA, and her experience as a DACA recipient. In this episode, we get into the importance of voting and the ways in which those who can vote have the responsibility to do so. Please enjoy this episode, and do not forget that November 8th is Election Day. If you're not sure how to register, or if you're registered, or if you can vote early where you are, I recommend going to just vote.org. It's an easy one-stop shop for all of this. So, without further ado, here's Juana Estrada Hernandez.
Hi, Juana. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Welcome to my home.
Yes, thank you for hosting me in your beautiful Santa Fe casita.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a Hello Print Friend first. You are, I think, the first artist I've recorded in my house. Like, I've definitely done in-person recordings, but they've always been out in the field at Print Austin or something like that. And so this is really fun. It's like getting to have a talk while we get to watch my dogs walking around the house. Hopefully they'll be good.
Yes, no, they're lovely. They're lovely little dogs. But yeah, thank you for opening the doors to your home. And yeah, it's just exciting to be back in Albuquerque.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. As we'll get into, you have some roots in educational history in this part of the world. So I'm sure we'll get into that in your story. But before we do, can you just introduce yourself and let people know who you are, where you are, what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Juana Estrada Hernandez, and I am a printmaking artist working as an assistant professor of printmaking at Fort Hays State University. I am originally from Luis Moya, Zacatecas, and my family and I migrated to the U.S. in the early 2000s when I was 7 years old. And I was raised for most of my life in Denver, and once I started jumping from high school to undergrad and grad school. I've just traveled ever since.
I feel like that's dividing childhood sort of right down the middle, right? So you had first 7 years in one part of the world, and then you moved. What was that like in terms of your artistic development, having one culture, one set of inputs leading up until 7, and then probably one quite different from 7. Do you think that that affected the way you perceive art and art making?
I think it changes the way that I think art has to or should function in some ways. Art has always been like a really large part of my life. So when I did finally move from Mexico to the US, my family, and I'm sure a lot of people who have to migrate, there's a lot of transitions that happen with like language, assimilating to new cultures, and all that in between. But for me, art was something that I used to communicate when I didn't know how to speak English. And so even though I moved to the U.S. at a very early age, and I feel like a lot of my teachers told me that it would have been easier to learn to speak a new language. I always had like a learning curve. It took me a little bit longer to do that. And so going through school in those early years, art really just, I don't know, in many ways, I've always drawn in school. I think that's the story of a lot of artists. Like, we were just spacey people.
Yeah, the doodlers. Yeah.
But like for me, it was therapy in many ways, but then also it was like a really literal way of communicating with people of things that I needed. I don't know, sometimes I'd be in the classroom and I wouldn't know how to say something, so I would just doodle it and say, hey, hold up my little sketch and say, this is what I need. And so using visual language to communicate when I didn't have the words has always been, I don't know, in those moments, it was really life-saving in many ways. But then also, as I got older, sort of like trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I felt like, I don't know, it just feels like art has always come in at different moments in my life where I needed it to communicate with people. And I think it's still functioning in that same way now.
Oh, yeah.
But at least, I guess now I've been able to learn how to speak English and communicate orally. And so, I think I'm just ranting now.
No worries. I think that's all really good and interesting, because it sounds like art had this place in your life, as you said, with a lot of artists, where it's something that you do in school, but it also had a real functionality for you early on. I think in a way that for maybe people who didn't have that experience, they wouldn't have had that direct connection between art and communication. Because I think a lot of times when kids are just kids, it's like, oh, here's a bunny, here's a rainbow, and it doesn't have that direct communication and that real purpose within a young artist's life. Yeah, for sure. What's your earliest memory of art and knowing that this is a thing that someone can do with their life?
To be honest, I wasn't really sure if being an artist was going to be something that I was going to be able to do, because I think that as being a migrant, I don't think that's something that you always have a choice for. It's really, going through school, I really thought I had to be a doctor or a lawyer or just something that for sure there was like a guaranteed possible job after school.
Yeah.
And
do you think that was something that you got from your folks or just the people around you? Like, where'd that come from?
I think it was like a self-placed pressure.
Yeah.
Growing up, my parents, we moved to this country to have the freedom to have the life that we want. And yet at the same time, it's okay, well, to prosper in the U.S. or to get out of poverty, maybe being an artist isn't like the direct choice.
It's not the stereotypical one, that's for sure.
Yes, but also I didn't really have models in my family to have that, to like feel like I had that choice until when I got to school. They're like, oh, hey, it looks like you really like doing this. Have you thought about being an artist? And in high school, we had this program where it was a science ready program, so that if you wanted to go into the medical field, you could take classes that could prepare you for that. And so for a long time, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a doctor. And I really enjoyed the science. But then I started taking those classes and I was like, oh no, I don't want to do this. And they had assignments to do medical illustrations of the things that we were learning. And so then for a while, I was like, oh yeah, like I can do medical illustration. But then when it came time to figure out how to go to school for that, I was like, oh yeah, I can't afford to do that.
Yeah.
So that didn't happen.
Yeah. I don't think I realized that medical illustration was still a thing. It seems like you would think that it'd be the kind of almost old-fashioned, but of course, now that I'm thinking about it, it would have to be that didactic drawing is something you can't really take a photo of because you have to, I guess, I'm thinking about it in terms of the human body, but pull out a tendon that's sticking straight up to point to it or something that you just couldn't actually happen in photographs. Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting. And so you realized that medical illustration wasn't going to work. Right. And so at that point, were you thinking about the fine arts?
No, not yet. So that was towards the end of high school. And during that time, well, not only did I realize that it was too expensive for me to go to college for medical illustration, but a lot of people during that time, I also was like going through this experience where I've always known that I've always been undocumented. Mm-hmm. There's these social understandings that happen with navigating the world with this status, but I guess I didn't really truly understand what that really meant, the implications of pursuing higher education. Yeah. And so that was like early, like 2011. And so it was a really distressful time, to be honest. Yeah. Trying to figure out, I had the grades, I thought I had the work ethic, I had the drive to go and pursue college, but I guess I just didn't really understand that. Like, oh yeah, like being with this undocumented status, you can't qualify for FAFSA. Yep. Get a driver's license, do these rite of passage things that happen in high school. And then a year later, when Barack Obama passed a deferred action for childhood arrivals in 2012, it was like a saving grace. Yeah. And also that's short for DACA. And so during that year, I had other undocu friends who ended up finding a university called Fort Hays State University in Hays, Kansas. And I was like, hey, you're also... well, now you're DACA. Like, how did that happen? Since we can't apply for FAFSA. And so he said this university had a lot of scholarships that they didn't care about your undocumented status.
Oh, that's great.
And so when I finally got out to Fort Hays, and I want, hopefully Hector Villanueva will hear this, but Hector Villanueva was the academic recruitment advisor for the Access Opportunity Grant at that university. And he went out of his way to come to Denver. So long story short, I got all the scholarships that I needed to attend this college. It was almost like a full ride.
Oh, wonderful.
But my parents, this was the first time that I was, like, I'm also the first person in my family to go to college. And they were not going to let me go because it was out of state. And
too far?
It was too far. Oh. And I think they were just scared. Yeah. I was the first person that was going to go to college. They didn't know how to navigate that. Both my parents didn't. They only got as far as like 5th and 6th grade. And so navigating academia was something that they've never experienced. Mm-hmm. And so Hector, he was the person who was helping me to apply for all these scholarships. And I basically said, SOS, hey Hector, can you come out and speak to my parents? Because they are unsure of allowing me to go. And so Hector drove his little car from Hays, Kansas, all the way to Aurora, Colorado to talk to them. And he made it happen.
Oh my God.
And there's a lot of people that I thank for my success, but I think that he really saved my life.
That's an amazing story. And I think we will definitely send this to Hector, because I think I've had that, not that experience, but I've had moments in my life where it just seems like there are people who, for almost no reason, just decide that I'm worth something and that worth fighting for. And that's the thing you can't ever pay back. You can just hope to be able to do that for someone else. And so it's just a beautiful story. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think it was that he said to your folks that let them know that it was going to be okay and that this was important for you to do?
I think he just, during that meeting, he really broke down what the college life was going to be about. And he talked about the campus, like, culture, the classes that were going to be involved, but also he talked to them in Spanish. He's also Hispanic, and I think that it really helped them to see someone that looked like us and say, oh, wow, he's in higher academia, and like he seems to, I think it was just like a perfect scenario, because I think he made them feel comfortable. He was clear, he was honest, and I think he just genuinely cared. And I think that's what they needed to see. till this day, Hector doesn't work at that university anymore, but he still reaches out and asks how I'm doing. And he asks about my parents. And I think Hector really cared about not necessarily just raising the numbers for our institution that I currently work for now, but he genuinely cared about creating community.
Yeah. 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 And people who I think see their roles, particularly in academia, as a way to actually affect positive change are some of the most precious people, because there's so much administration in academia. I feel like that's just weird and soulless, you know. I've got family who are professors, and it's just, yeah, talking to them sometimes it's, oh my gosh. So that's wonderful. And so what was it like for you, as you said, being the first one in your family? So you're really setting out in uncharted waters. I'm sure you had friends who had gone off, but in terms of your immediate family, you were the first. Was this like exciting, scary? Did you feel like you were ready?
I felt like I've been preparing for this moment when I finally got to undergrad, like all my life. So this is something that our parents were like, okay, you're going to go through the motions, and this is the last step for you to be whatever you want to be. So it was like exciting, but it was also scary, because I was like, I can't fail any classes, because again, like financially speaking, it was such a miracle that I got to that place. But I don't know. I just enjoyed it. And then also too, I think that this university was small and it was intimate, and I don't know, it just gave me space to just do what I had to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you arrived, did you know fine art was what you were going to do at that point?
It's funny because when I got there, Hector was under the understanding that I was going to be like a neurophysicist. And so I signed up for all these science classes, because still I felt like, oh, you know what? I can take art classes on the side and still pursue that and enjoy that. But also I need this more practical job. And then I showed up for my first classes that first week. And then I said, you know what, Hector, I can't do this. And he was like, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to get an art degree. And he's like, whoa, that's totally different, because your grades are not reflective of, like, your grades are really great and they're really reflective towards that science path. And so he's like, okay, well, bring me your art. Let me see your art. And so I brought him like a few paintings that I had made in community college and drawings. And he was like, oh, wow, you're actually pretty good. Okay, like, that's good. He's like, go for it then. And I think he just wanted to make sure that I was serious and that I wasn't like, I'm not like that. I really, like, I felt like that was a real passion. And he was like, okay, cool. Like, he's like, I just thought you were like one of those people who just doodled for fun and just thought, I don't know what he thought, but.
I mean, I could see it, especially if you see a young woman with a lot of talent in STEM wanting to see that be pursued. And then it's your life, your choice, but yeah, wanting to just make sure that it's okay. All right. Now, Juana can just do everything. So this is fine. Yeah. Yeah. And you see, we're going to have some Hello Print Friend ambiance. We've got a monsoon coming through the house right now. The mic's picking up a little bit, but it's cozy. So do you think that early interest in that, and astrophysicist, right? Yeah. That's like, I feel like that's the joke thing that people make when they're thinking of something very hard to do. You know, like, it's not astrophysics, right? Do you think that early interest in science, does it show up in your art at all, or was that really more of a practical choice? Or was it a passion that sort of finds its way back into what you make?
No, I would say it was definitely a practical choice. I mean, I've always liked learning how things are made, how things are taken apart and put back together, and how things are just, like, made. And I felt like, I don't know, it was really interesting and it was really engaging for me. But I think in some ways, like, I don't think necessarily the science shows up in the work, but I think printmaking is so process-based. There's a lot of, there could be a lot of chemistry involved. And so there's things that I continue to learn about print, and things that are continuously being discovered and pushed. And so I think, like, that sense of, like, excitement for science and like alchemy and things like that are still in there.
And process. Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I definitely would say that I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if I pursued a path like that, but I don't know. I don't regret it.
Oh yeah,
So.
totally. Who knows? Maybe you'd be out working at Los Alamos or something out this way. Who knows? And so, when you first discovered printmaking, was that in your undergrad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was. So when I finally did that switch from science to an art degree, the only thing that I had left, based off of what was left over in the classes that were available, was printmaking.
Oh, printmaking.
So the night before, I'd never heard of printmaking, and I think this is pretty common for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I've never heard of printmaking before, and so the night before, I'm like, what is printmaking? And the first things that popped up on Google were screen printing, you can make shirts. And so I just remember not going very far down the Google, in my Google search. And so I just showed up the next day thinking, oh, cool, we're going to make t-shirts and with screen prints and make clothing and I don't know, things that are more commercial. And then I ended up not learning screen printing at all in my undergrad. But after that first semester, I was like, oh my God, this provides a little bit of everything. Drawing, painting, working with your hands. And I don't know, I just never turned back after that. It was such a really exciting class. And yeah, it was just like a love at first sight. I think I got halfway through that first semester and I just said, I'm going to be a print major. And that was
great.
It.
Yeah. And so what was your early work like?
It was still very figurative, representational. It was I think a lot of it, in terms of the theme, there's a lot of overlap, but a lot of that early work was just still figuring out my place in the world, trying to figure out what it meant to be a DACA person, giving myself time and space to figure out what it meant for me, what it meant for others who were in this place. And but then also there was just a lot of bad prints with trying to figure out process and understanding how things worked. But visually speaking, there were very dark, because I think that even though starting college should be in a very exciting time, which it was, there was still a lot of tension, because a year before I wasn't really sure what my life would have been. And then DACA just showed up and I was like, oh, awesome. Now I can take a step forward, not 5 steps back.
From talking to other people, what I understand is that the only choice would be to return to whatever country someone's from and then wait and try and come as an international student, which would then be this whole nother long process. And of course, as you said, there's no financial aid for international students and all of it. So yeah, I see what you're saying about the stepping forward versus stepping back. Was there any sense of being able to process that, what you'd been through in that early work? As you said, the uncertainty and then the certainty and then the uncertainty again. That's some big, dramatic experiences to be having as a young person that a lot of people who are going to college don't have to experience that. It's just, I just want to get into at least my safety school, right? Did that come out at all in your early making?
Yeah, definitely. It still hasn't gone away, because even though DACA did start in 2012, it's still, actually, as of last week, it just got sent back to court and they're deciding whether to take it or leave it. And so this level of uncertainty, I don't think has ever left since the program started. But in some ways, I'm still living in survival mode. And I'm not really sure, even if DACA were to be, I don't know, if there was a different pathway for me and the other 600,000 people, I think that a lot of us have been living this way for so long that I'm not really sure what it's like not to live that way. Yeah. A lot of people say, I was like, oh, that's really sad. But at the end of it, it's it just is as of right now.
Yeah.
But as far as the early work, I really tried to, there was one thing that my undergrad mentor said to me very early on. His name is Gordon Sherman, who recently passed away. He basically was like, well, you're making the very early stuff. First year, I was making images of skulls and animals and things like that. And I remember him saying, well, this is great and all, but I think that based off of the things that I've learned from you and all the stories that you shared with me, it seems like you need to, if you're ready, allow space for that. And he I don't know, I wouldn't say he gave me permission, but he's like, it's okay to do this with your work. And maybe this is what you need to do. And I was like, okay, I was really young. I was like, okay, whatever. But once I started making prints about my family's migrating experience, it just started to drive my work in ways that I couldn't have foreseen maybe like before then. But yeah, it gave me almost this drive to really, there is a power in making political artwork, and that there is power of sharing stories of the things that people have experienced in the past, present, and will, and maybe in the future. And I think that for me, because I was a part of the new DACA wave, I felt like at that moment, miraculously I got to go to school for art, where I wasn't sure if I was ever going to be able to. Then I'm going to use my art to make a difference and to basically use my work to create a platform for for others. There's a lot of people in my community who are afraid to expose themselves and their statuses and things like that. But I think that there's also a lot of power in that. It doesn't, I think it's important to know that we are here and accepting that it is okay to share our stories. It was just a really helpful thing for me early on. It made me feel like my voice mattered and that I could change the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And everything you said makes a lot of sense, and particularly in regard to the power of storytelling. And I would imagine telling your own story from your own perspective. Because as you say, there are a lot of trepidation about people coming forward with their documented status, like for good reason, because there can be consequences. But it's without the voice of undocumented people in the world, then there's no narrative that comes from them. And it's only things being projected onto people who are undocumented. So being able to be a voice that's actually creating a narrative from the lived perspective of a human who's gone through this, it's incredible work.
It has to happen that way. And a lot of my recent artwork that I made in grad school, I was going through grad school during the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And we can talk a lot about the things that we disagree, and as far as like everything that they did and changed. But their administration, I think, was the most vocal about their distaste for migrant communities and their continuing of changing policies to attack migrants. Yes, like for me, they went after DACA and they failed, which hooray for me and hooray for the rest of the folks who have this status. But then they also went after people who were fleeing violence in lots of places in Latin America with the zero tolerance policy that was separating families in the U.S. southern border. So during that time in grad school, I think it like really propelled that. Like it really, I suppose, it really pushed me to keep talking about my stories, because there was a lot of misrepresentation in the media. And so I was like, wait a minute, that's not accurate. And my nieces, I now have a nephew, but around 2018, 2019, I had my family came up from Denver to visit me in Albuquerque, and it was their first time driving up, and they brought my oldest niece, and at the time was 8 years old. And when they finally got to Albuquerque, my niece was like, she just got out of the car and I was asking me a lot of questions, and a lot of them were like, hey, like, where do we come from? Like, where is Trump's wall? My grandma and my grandpa were saying that, like, we can't go anywhere near the border, like, or we can't go to Mexico because we can't come back. And so for her, she was like, what? She had a lot of questions. And she was like, yeah, because on the news, I saw that they were saying that we are bad people and that we are doing A, B, C, and D. And so she was experiencing this like really skewed negative perspective of her own family. Yeah. Her people in our community. And so she was like, well, what's going on? Because that's not true. Because I'm being raised by all of you guys and we're not bad people. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I had the privilege of, I guess, in some ways, knowing more of where I come from. Like, she's now second generation. Right. And so she had a lot of questions about, where do we come from? And why did we come here? And how did we get here? And what are we going to do? What were we doing in those first early days moving to the U.S. and things like that? And while also trying to push away that negative perspective that was being presented in the media. And so for me, after that trip, I was like, oh my God, like it solidified this sort of responsibility that I gladly took to say, okay, like I really need to share my family's history or oral histories and traditions, and just like really push that into the work, while also not forgetting that when there is a lot of pain and trauma that happened within my family history of moving to the US, but then there's also a lot of beautiful things that have happened as well. My niece, like she just happened because of that. But so yeah, like I think it is important to have people be able to like voice their stories and not allow, because once other people that are not from your culture or your community like start sharing your stories, I don't know, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it's
just not their experience.
Exactly. And it's going to be altered in some way. There's no, even people with good intentions, if just passing through another human experience, something will change coming out the other side.
Right.
Yeah. So in terms of how these narratives, as you said, both sort of like the beautiful and the traumatic and probably everything in between, how do they show up in your work?
Yeah, so a lot of my work focuses on, I would say, non-linear intergenerational stories that are done in collaboration with my mom and dad, my nieces and nephews, sometimes my aunts and uncles, my siblings. And as of recently, I've been making just like I genuinely like all the processes in print, but I've been doing a lot more just like lithographs as of late. And I think it just reminds me of that. It's like a very direct process, but I've always loved to draw. And so it just feels like one of those like natural choices. But I have prints that show like my family celebrating like a party, like with a piñata. So like thinking about like the traditions that we brought to the US. There's a lot of prints that have like food in it. And so really just like uplifting those traditional foods that we brought with us. There's prints that show, there's one print like with like a little boy in the slingshot that I presented in SGCI this past conference. Yeah, like a little slingshot with a nopal trying to shoot ice. So still talking about like the ways that ice still affects our immigrant communities. And yeah, they're just kind of like all over the map as far as stories. But yeah, so it's just like a lot about just showing my family members within them, showing like different aspects of like my culture, so like food, and not only just like drawing food, but also like the colors. Like I've been using I've been making more colorful prints, just of like the reflective of like my home. And then sometimes too, like there's like writing that shows up in the prints as well.
Yeah. And
when I do write on the prints, sometimes it's like forms of questions, and they're always in Spanish, because I think that I feel like there's always the question of like, who is your audience in going through art school, or like, who did you make this for? Who is this intended for? But I think once you put the work out there, you never know who's going to see the work. Sure, you can be very particular as far as where the work is going to be exhibited, but at the end of the day, it's open to the public. And for me, I still wanted to have, as far as like my choice of using Spanish, for one, it makes me feel connected to my family, to my culture, but also I think that it's important that if this work is about, it's about my family, it's for my community, it's for my family, then there has to be some sort of connection there. And for me, I choose Spanish to do that with. When I presented my MFA thesis show last December, I specifically picked a place in Albuquerque in the Burles neighborhood because I didn't necessarily like the spaces that were available on campus, but I felt like it was really important to get my work out into the community. When I presented it, I drew directly on the wall, and on the wall there was a lot of questions to guide the story that I presented. But when the public started to come in to the show, there was a lot of there was actually a lot of like little families, Hispanic families. And of course, my mentors came in, my grad cohort and friends came in. But when I saw these families come in and see the work, I really saw them engage with the work in a way that I've never seen before. And what I mean by that is that they really sat with the work and read the questions, and like they started to talk about their own stories in the space, which is something that I never could have anticipated. And for me, that was really humbling and exciting, because here I am presenting this body of work that shares my family's migration stories and their triumphs and the pain, the things that we've experienced as immigrants living in the U.S. And yet there was other people coming in. And of course, we're not, as a culture, we're not a monolith. Everybody has different experiences, but these people were coming in and they were talking about their own experiences. And I went over to some women and I said, and I just talked to them in Spanish. I said, hey, like, what do you think about the work? And they're like, are you the artist? And I was like, yeah. And then they were like, this is not how you say that. And I was like, what do you mean? And then she's like, it's actually, I can't remember what it was, but she was like, this is not how you write this. And I was like, well, where are you from? And she was like, well, I'm from Chihuahua. And I was like, well, I'm from Zacatecas. Like, we say things differently. And yeah, she was a very sassy person. But yeah, it almost created like a pod or like a safe space to share stories.
Yeah.
But then also too, there's a lot of people who feel surprised that anybody would take the time to depict them and their stories. And my mom and dad have always said, well, why us? Why does anybody want to see us in the gallery or in the museum? Like, they're like, I don't know. They're very confused about that. And so for me, I'm like, well, why? Like, I think that our stories matter. And I think that you matter. I want to see people that look like me in institutions, a gallery or a museum or a university or all these things, because it does matter. And but they're always so surprised. And these families that came in during my show, they were just so surprised. They're like, oh, wow, these are our stories in some loose way. There was a lot of intersections that they had with mine. I think that's why it's important for me to keep making my work. Because I want to live in a world where it's not surprising to see brown people in a space. Totally. or to have people just be surprised that they can see themselves within the white gallery walls.
Yeah. And I think that's something that for a lot of people, it's sort of invisible to them. When your identities are the dominant narrative, you don't even question it. I think it really speaks to how when you only have people who are the dominant narrative creating the dominant narrative, that it will never, ever, ever change. And I think just really in the last decade or so, I think you're seeing major culture producers like Disney realizing the value of having other narratives, just something else, you know? And the fact that, not that I would ever think Disney is altruistic. I think they probably realized they could make money on it, of course. But I think starting to understand like the real emotional gravity of that for people who haven't been seeing themselves in visual culture, in museums, as you say, in movies. And so I would hope that we're kind of starting to move the needle on that a little bit in many ways. And so with fine artists like yourself working, and then also in pop culture as well, that maybe we are hopefully moving towards that, as you say, that time when it isn't shocking to people. And maybe your niece and nephew, when they have kids, it won't be as shocking. But it's important work, and it's important to be able to give people opportunities to be in the situation, to be the culture creators. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as far as changing the who is represented in different spaces, I think that there's still a lot of work to do, but I think that there's still definitely, the wave is starting to part and there's starting to be more room. But I think also we're seeing the sort of wave, new printmakers, new curators, new gallery owners, new shop owners that are all for that. And I think that's what we need, like people who are going to open those doors. And even if there isn't people who open those doors, then well, hell, let's make our own spaces.
Yeah.
That's okay too. And maybe that's even better.
Totally. Because again, as you say, when your narrative passes through someone else, it's going to change, And so if that gatekeeper is still someone else, it's altered. Yeah, for sure. So you have a relatively recent MFA. Was it last year that you graduated?
In
2012? Sorry, 2012. So dyslexic. 2021?
Yes, December
Yeah.
2021.
So that means that your MFA experience was probably greatly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, it did. I was supposed to finish in spring 2021, but I decided to extend another semester. And I think a large part of that decision was just because of the pandemic, I'm sure there's a lot of other folks who can connect with this, but there was just a lot of shops that were closed, like access to studios. And I guess I just felt like, I had lost a semester to the pandemic, and I thought it would be okay to stay for another. I've been in school for so long, I was like, what's another semester? Right. But then also too, like, I felt like I finally hit a spot in where my handle on the techniques, like everything just was like, oh wow, like I'm not having problems with, I don't know, a spit bite or like these nuanced processes. But then also too, I think I just needed more time to process the things that we had lived through with the pandemic. But then also, I think I just created a more cohesive presentation for my thesis. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to pressure myself to hurry up and finish, because for me it was like, first of all, again, I wasn't really sure if I was gonna go to grad school, and I just felt like I had to finish it in my own terms, in my own way, and if it had to be for another semester, then that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's really an important message for particularly young artists to hear, because there is such a pressure to just constantly doing, making, producing on a deadline. And so to hear that it can be okay to just say, to do my best work, I need more time. And I feel like that's not something that artists really are taught, that that's okay. You know, there's so much pressure on producing, I think, particularly in school. So, yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise, I think too, at that time, getting out of this space of being sheltered in place, we had been staying at home for so long, and also readjusting to getting back into the world. I'm glad that I stayed a little bit longer, and I think sometimes even for me it is hard to say I need more time, because I like to keep myself busy, but I think at that time I was like, okay, I really just need more time. And but I'm glad that the finances worked out and I was able to do it.
Yeah.
But making that choice of giving yourself more time isn't always as easy for everyone.
Yeah, it's definitely, things have to line up for it to work, but definitely, do it if you can. And so what was your final thesis like?
It was just really busy. I recently got hired for my first teaching position. I actually got hired the semester that I was thesising. Oh, gosh. So, like I said, I graduated in December 2021, but I started my teaching position in August of that fall semester. So it was really hectic. Yeah. There was a lot of nights where I didn't sleep very well. I don't know. It was not the healthiest, I would say, but also I think it was like the semester where I felt like I really hit my stride with making. One idea just kept informing the next and the next, but then also I don't know, it was like this really interesting excitement for what I was doing, where it's not to say that I wasn't excited with the things that I was making before during grad school, but I don't know what happened. And maybe it was just like the delirium of having to teach during the day and then work at night and then just do it all over again until it was completed. But yeah, thesis semester was a trip, but I do wonder what it would have been like if I hadn't had to teach. Yeah. But either way, like I think that the work that I presented was some of the most like honest work that I've ever made. And
what does it mean by honest to you?
Early on, I felt like I made work, like the work that I was making, it really was like, hey, like let me share my narrative so that I can change your mind of not being anti like immigrant or like racist or discriminative towards like other people who are maybe not, that don't look like you. And when I mean like honest, it was work that shared my stories in a way that it wasn't really, there was not as much emphasis of let me change somebody else's mind. It's let me just show you like, or let me tell you my story. And I don't care what you think, because at the end of the day, I needed to do it for me. I needed to do it for the other generations of my family. I needed to do it for my community, and just and do it because I needed to for myself and not for any other bigoted people.
That's such an important distinction, but one that I feel like feels really reflective, I think, of a lot of artists' journeys into being a mature artist, is that, as you said, like, you're often asked to think about your audience. Of course, that's part of the training that we get as artists, but that ability to find, not knowing that you've got an audience out there, but making work because you need to see it in the world, not thinking so much about its reception, I feel like is like it's something that you can only get there by just making a lot, kind of building up that understanding of yourself and all of it, getting to the point where you can just be like, no, this needs to exist for me and for the people that I care about is a very cool place to be, I think. Yeah. So what are you looking forward to? What do you have on the horizon that people can keep an eye out for?
I have a couple shows coming up this year, but I'm just hoping to be able to make new work and things like that. But I really just need a future where my future is stable. And so I feel like that's just a very, I don't know when that will be, but like now being like going through school and starting my first teaching job. Yes, teaching is going to keep me busy and I enjoy it. I'm going to have more shows coming up, but I just really need time to live without a unstable status. Yeah. And I want that for other people as well. And yeah, Grandpa Biden needs to hurry up and do something for our communities. Yeah. But yeah, so as far as the tangible things that are coming up, I have a solo show coming up in Hecho a Mano Gallery in Santa Fe, and a 2-person show with Humberto Sáenz at the Janet Turner Print Museum in Chico, California.
Yeah.
Yep, in Chico, California.
Cool.
But yeah, so that's what's coming up, and yes, but yeah, I guess like for those who will be hopefully like hearing this podcast in the future, like I really want all of you guys to really just stay informed, of course, like about what's happening in the world. And yeah, sometimes we do need to like shut off from all the things that we don't like that are happening in our communities and things like that. But yeah, we just have to stay informed and see what's happening with other communities. And for me, I mean, yeah, like I'm very passionate about what's happening with DACA because of course I am being affected by it, but it's just like one facet of a big problem that's happening, that has been happening in the United States for a long time, which is that there's no real, there hasn't been really like any tangible solutions for providing what the government, right, has called essential workers, right? Like people who work in the agricultural sector, people who work in like factories and things like that, like people who kept our nation going during one of its worst times during COVID. But yet like there's still no relief being provided for us. So as far as like what I ask for our community is just like keep your ears open, and I don't know, you guys can just spread the word about what's happening, do it, because I think that, I don't know, it's just like a conversation that keeps being cycled in my community and there's never a solution.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and it's, I know, like as you're talking, bouncing around in my head is these ideas around how, like, we're all Americans. Unless you're an Indigenous person, someone not too long ago came to this country. And the culture in America is very individualistic and very, like, divisive, and, you know, like the Hatfields and the McCoys. I mean, this like this is mine, you can't have it, you know, this. And it's led to real strife and just awful cultural climate in the States that's just getting worse. And I feel like the only antidote to that is moving back into we're all Americans, trying to find that shared sense of what it is to live in this land and be on this soil, and know that the vast majority of us are all visitors here, and that we need to understand how we don't survive unless we all survive. And as you said, people who kept the country absolutely going, like kept your strawberries in your Trader Joe's in summer 2020, right? They are American because they are part of the American system. And it is an awful hypocrisy, particularly in this country.
Oh,
to
for
make
sure.
that distinction.
Yeah, and we live on stolen land.
Exactly.
I don't care what you think your history is, like that's what it is. And then too, also there was a lot of, I don't know if a lot of people know this or not, but there was a lot of people in the medical field who are also DACA, and we're like in the front lines, right, of this pandemic. So you're right, there is a lot of hypocrisy, right? Where I think that we, like as migrants, we can't have this hold on the American dream. But I think that within the American dream, there is a lot of hypocrisy. And then there is a lot of, I don't know, like I'm not really sure about that word anymore because of the fact that, yeah, there's still so much work to be done. And yes, I think that there's still a lot of disparities that are happening all over the world. And yes, maybe we, like the folks who are, I don't know, it's interesting because I have family who still live in Mexico, and they're like, well, like despite the politics, like you're still in the US, like you still have been able to more or less live like a successful life. It's been hard, but life is hard, but it's okay. But with that conversation, I still want, there shouldn't be a choice between, I don't know. I think like the understanding that I got is even if things are hard in the US, like you're still living a better life than you would have been in anywhere else where there's poverty and violence and natural disasters happening all the time and corruption and things like that. But there's still a lot more that can be done for the people that live in the U.S. And yeah, like, I don't know. It just pisses me off that they say that we are like essential workers and we are still getting screwed at the end. Mm-hmm. And we're given promises with every Democratic administration and nothing happens. And yeah, that's why voting is important. But I just feel like there's still a lot of people in the government that hold back. And I don't know.
I totally agree. And I feel like you're voicing, I think, what a lot of progressive people feel, which is a deep frustration with the Democratic Party for not upholding the ideals that we hold. And you're like, yeah, let's take care of undocumented workers. Let's take care of healthcare. Let's give mothers paid maternity leave. All of these things that like everyone I know who identifies as a progressive person would love to see enacted. And yet, it just is this impotence, it seems, on the part of the Democratic Party to actually do anything.
Yeah. And then there's still also the other side that people who can vote don't vote. Yeah. And that is horrible. I can't vote. Mm-hmm. I wish I had a voice. But as far as electing whoever's going to run the place where I live in now, and yeah, it's like when I hear people who say things like, well, my vote doesn't really matter. I wish you could give me your vote because I'm sitting here with my hands tied, wishing that I could just cast my ballot, and I can. And like, how am I more informed about the dates on when you have to register or where you have to go than the person who has the born given right to do so?
Mm-hmm. We could definitely do a whole nother episode on that. It was really interesting living in Australia where voting is mandatory. You actually get fined if you don't vote. Well, Juana, where can people find you and see your work and follow you and help inform themselves about what you're doing and your story?
Yes, so I have a Instagram account called at Wanna See My Prints.
Possibly the best Instagram print name out there, yeah.
Yes, and you should thank Chantel Bollinger for that. They're my partner, and they're like, do something memorable, do something punny, and they use puns all the time. I like puns, but then sometimes I'm like, oh my God, it's too much. Like, hell, thank you, Dad. Moments.
And we can also thank Chantel for wrangling the doggies and keeping the doggies quiet during this interview. So thank you.
And so you can find me on Instagram at Wanna See My Prints. I also have an artist website called wannaseemyprints.weebly.com. And you guys as far as like where you can see my work in real life, it's just going to be, like I said, I'm going to have some work in Santa Fe, some in Chico, some at 516 Arts, which is a contemporary museum in downtown Albuquerque, or otherwise you can just come and visit me in Hays, Kansas and see my work there.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much for coming out to my house and having a chat. This was really a treat to get to do this in person. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much.
If you like today's episode, we have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content like Shop Talk Shorts, where our editor, Timothy Pauschak, digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with past guests. Also, if monetary support isn't in the cards for you right now, you can leave a review for us on your podcast listening app of choice, or buy something from our sponsors and tell them Hello Print Friend sent you. But as always, the very, very best thing you can do to support this podcast is by listening and sharing with your fellow print friends around the world. And that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Martin Schneider, founder of the Open Press Project. We talk about his creation of the world's first widely accessible 3D printed printing press, why he gives it away for free, and his traveling exhibition of tiny prints made on this special press. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.